Welcome to Deepest Lore, where we explore overlooked or misunderstood stories in popular media. In previous videos, I argued against the popular misconception that the Sonic the Hedgehog series never had a complex story until Sonic Adventure, on the Dreamcast. Not only did that particular story actually function as a finale to an arc that began all the way back in Sonic 2, but even games before Sonic 2, mostly obscure Game Gear spin-off titles, also had their own story arc. But there were a few very early Sonic games, even before those Game Gear titles, that were even more obscure, yet, surprisingly, still introduced recurring elements to the series canon. Why were these games so obscure? Well, despite Sonic being deliberately made as a mascot to sell Sega's Mega Drive console, known as the Genesis in North America, Sega was only too happy to use him in other ways as well, such as on their aging Master System console and their handheld Game Gear console, as well as in their influential arcade division. In fact, Sonic had quite a few arcade games early in the franchise's lifespan, including some of the earliest games in the entire series. Okay, maybe I shouldn't say Flicky is the first Sonic game if Sonic isn't actually in it, but this other blue animal would eventually become very important in Sonic lore, and does appear in almost every Sonic game. Here, Flicky attempts to rescue smaller birds, called Pio Pio, or Chirp in the localized version, from cats and lizards, called Nyan Nyan, or Tiger, and Koro, or Iggy, collecting and leading the small birds out of the house. This theme of rescuing smaller, less anthropomorphic animals would of course be seen in practically every Sonic game, including one in particular that largely functions as a sequel to Flicky. But fine, let's move on to the first game that actually has Sonic in it.
Radmobile.
Alright. Maybe some of the more pedantic among you don't count Radmobile as a Sonic game either, even though it technically is his first appearance. I suppose it might not be canon, since only a Sonic figurine appears, and not the actual character himself. Perhaps it takes place in a universe where Sonic is only a fictional character, but not necessarily, since some Sonic games do portray him as a celebrity in his own universe. Of course, none of those games were out yet by this point. In fact, no other Sonic games were out yet by this point. However, this is the first time anyone ever saw the character, so it seems only right to include this game on our list. But fine, let's move on to games that actually include Sonic, and not just a toy based on him. From here on, we'll be looking at games that actually came out after the game titled Sonic the Hedgehog. But not long after. In fact, this may be the earliest sequel in the entire series, releasing over 3 weeks before the 8-bit version of the original game, which actually is a sequel and not just a conversion of the Mega Drive version, as I explained in a previous video. Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car is a very simple game. In fact, one could almost say it's less a game and more of a ride. But this ride does in fact have gameplay. It functions essentially as a vertical shooter, in which Sonic drives a police car and can jump out of the car to attack, which is basically this game's form of shooting. He chases Eggman, who attacks by throwing bombs, through a crowded city. So to return to my thesis that Sonic Adventure wasn't a very radical departure from the earlier games, just note that Sonic was in a realistic city since his second game, only 3 months after the original Sonic game. Now, to really push my luck with this line of thought, one could also argue that Sonic working with the police, seemingly being an actual officer, or perhaps some sort of deputized official, also foreshadows his eventual freelance work for other government law enforcement agencies, such as GUN, the Guardian Units of Nations. You might say I'm reaching, but I might say that you clicked on a video about the stories of Sonic the Hedgehog arcade games, so what did you expect? Oh yeah, this game also has Sonic driving a car, which is weird considering he's known for running much faster than cars. This game never explains why he would deliberately slow himself down, but there is one later game that actually does. However, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. As a side note, this game features the first voice acting in the series, even before Sonic CD. This of course contradicts the idea, now even adopted by Sonic Team themselves, that Sonic never spoke in his early appearances, leading to classic Sonic being a silent character in games such as Sonic Generations and Sonic Forces. In fact, the voice actors cast as Sonic and Eggman in Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car would go on to play the characters in several commercials, as well as the rest of the arcade games in the series. This game, along with our next two Sonic arcade games, were actually released after Sonic 2. However, as I covered in a previous video, story connections between the games preclude any games happening between the 16-bit version of Sonic 2 and Sonic 3 and Knuckles. In fact, the idea that Tails doesn't appear in these games seems to imply that they may actually take place before the 8-bit version of Sonic 2, since the manual for the 16-bit version says that Tails followed Sonic ever since they first met, which was in the 8-bit version of Sonic 2. As an early game in the series, Sega Sonic Cosmo Fighter Galaxy Patrol seems to take inspiration from only two other games, the first being, of course, the original Sonic the Hedgehog game, on Mega Drive, where all its characters are from. The second is Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car. Like that game, this is almost more of a ride than a game, but it does at least have a bit of gameplay, which functions as a vertical shooter, though a more traditional and slightly more complex one than Patrol Car. Here, Sonic flies a spaceship to attack Eggman, who seems to move his operation, including his captured animals, into outer space. One might think that this idea of Eggman operating from outer space originated in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which was technically released before this. However, note this early Japanese commercial for the very first Sonic game, which features Sonic flying a spaceship to attack Eggman's outer space base, which looks very much like the Death Egg, but technically predates the Death Egg's first appearance in Sonic 2. If anything, Cosmo Fighter seems to evoke this short clip more than it evokes Sonic 2, and would represent Sonic and Eggman's first known foray into space. This also wouldn't be the last time Sonic would fly a spaceship, though he's not always shown to be as competent as he is here. Since the first Sonic game, we've been told that Sonic has a knack for recruiting local animals in his fight against Eggman. This game, in which Sonic and friends are captured by Eggman, and must fight their way free from his base on Eggman Island, may possibly be the earliest chronological example of us getting to see this. This game was released in 1993, after Tails' first appearances in both the 8-bit and 16-bit versions of Sonic 2. However, note its copyright date of 1992, the same year as Tails' introduction. Starting development before the release of Sonic 2, Sega Sonic gives off strong vibes of being in development from a very early stage in the franchise. For example, despite being released after the introduction of Tails, one of Sonic's new friends, Ray the Flying Squirrel, almost seems like an alternate Tails, with the same color scheme and the same implied ability to fly that you can't actually take advantage of in-game. As a side note, the other friend, Mighty the Armadillo, seems to bear more than a passing resemblance to later introduction Knuckles the Echidna. One could perhaps take this as being two early friends, who essentially got replaced by Tails and Knuckles, which is basically what happened in the actual development of the series. In that case, this would take place between Sega Sonic Cosmo Fighter Galaxy Patrol and the 8-bit version of Sonic 2. But as for the actual game, up to 3 players use trackballs to control Mighty, Ray, and Sonic, as they make their way through Eggman Island. After a few short but varied locations, they corner the Mad Doctor, causing him to trigger the island's self-destruct mechanism. Luckily, our heroes escape in the nick of time. However, apparently the only thing that brought the 3 together was the fact that they were all captured by Eggman, because they would never be seen together again. Sonic would soon meet friends like Amy, Tails, and Knuckles, and not have any time left for these early allies. Mighty's only other appearance would be in one of the few games that does not include Sonic. And Ray would literally never be seen again. At least in this timeline. Of course, the arcade games I've covered so far are so odd and obscure that most people would probably say just to not pay attention to them. I say these people are fools, missing out on the first appearances of absolute cultural juggernauts like Mighty the Armadillo, and Ray the Flying Squirrel, and arguably even Station Square. But there is one Sonic arcade game that is quite a bit more popular. One which was a more mainstream genre. An arcade game with very interesting characters and locations. An arcade game that deserves a video all to itself. So next time, we'll be examining the overlooked masterpiece that quite possibly has the deepest lore not just in the Sonic series, but in the entire medium of video games. By the way, here are the cabinets for Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car. Make sure you take a good, hard look at these masterpieces of artistic engineering before saying that Sonic was only for little kids and was never supposed to have a story.